All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you're at in the world. We're here for our next Altero sponsored webinar. This one on vSphere Automation Masterclass. My name is Andy Serwich, and I think we're going to get going here. We got a lot of great material with you to share with you. I've got a good friend of mine here today, Luke Oriana. How's it going, my friend?
Hey everybody, thanks for joining.
Yeah. Hey, Luke. It's great to have you here. I know you are, you're quite the repository of scripting information. You've certainly taught me a lot of things over the years, and I hear you actually have some really cool Terraform stuff to show us a little bit later in the presentation today, right?
Yep, I do. I got quite a lengthy demo with Terraform, so we're gonna have a little bit of fun today.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to that one myself. I'm always looking for, new scripting tools, and I try to always pick up on that stuff whenever I can, just because it's becoming a very code-driven world, right? You and I were talking the other day about the concept of infrastructure programmer, right?
Yep, yep.
So that's kind of interesting. I mean, kind of takes the idea of an the IT person that handles infrastructure automation and kind of creates like a its own little job title almost. Infrastructure programmer. I found that interesting. You and I were talking about it the other day.
Yeah,
So
yeah. That was pretty interesting. A lot of experts in Microsoft are saying that there's going to be an infrastructure developer role more than the systems engineer. It's gonna kind of evolve into that. So yeah, cool stuff.
yeah, definitely interesting. So I mean, it's really relevant in our conversation today. So, well, I guess what do you think? Should we get started and show everybody the automation goodness that we have to share today?
Let's do it.
All right, let's take a look. So first off, let's start with our agenda for the day. So first, we're going to do some basic introductions of myself, Luke, and Altero, the sponsor of today's webinar. From there, we're going to cover just really quickly some very some core Power CLI basics. I always like to make sure that everybody is kind of on the same page as far as Power CLI skills. That way, you kind of know the basics, and that kind of gives you a little bit more insight into some of the more advanced techniques that we're going to be talking about later on in the session. Kind of gives you an idea of how powerful those really are. From there, we're going to be talking about deployment automation with Power CLI, and then we're going to hand things over to Luke to talk about desired state configuration for vSphere, and then talk about some cloud integrations and, again, Terraform. So I'm really looking forward to the demo there. And then we're going to do some wrap up and Q&A at the end. Now, one thing about the Q&A, feel free to ask your questions as we go through the session today. Definitely, if we can address those as we go through the session, we'll do so. Otherwise, we'll try to address as many of them as we can at the end of the session. Now, one other thing I always like to point out is if for some reason we don't get to your question today, we always do a follow-up blog post, or we'll post the questions to our forums. We'll make sure we get your questions answered in some way, shape, or form. In this particular instance, I'm leaning more towards a post on our VMware blog at altero.com/VMware. So keep an eye out there. Again, if you ask a question that doesn't get answered today, we'll get you an answer there at a future date. So from there, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Again, my name is Andy Serwich. I've been in the industry for a while now. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm also a VMware vExpert, and I'm a technical evangelist for Altero, the sponsor of today's webinar. So dating myself a little bit here, but I've been in the industry for 16 plus years in a variety of capacities. A lot of that time has really been spent on the Windows Server stack and VMware and infrastructure technologies in general. A lot of my new areas of focus include cloud, containerization technologies, and things like that. I'm quite active out on Twitter. So if you, again, have any follow-up questions after today's show, you can always reach out to me there, and I'll try and get you an answer there. And also, I blog quite frequently out on all of the Altero blogs, which the 3 URLs are down at the bottom there. So with that, I'll pass it over to Luke so he can introduce himself.
Hey, my name's Luke Oriana. I'm a VMware vExpert and system administrator. I have about 6+ years of experience with PowerShell automation in the MSP and enterprise worlds. Typically, I focus on technologies like VMware, Windows, PowerShell, Azure. I'm just starting to get into Azure, so it's been pretty fun there. I've been blogging for Altero since 2014. Most of my material is pretty geared toward automation, so be sure to check that out.
Has it really
That's
been since 2014?
yeah, 5 years. Isn't that crazy?
It is pretty crazy. I know you've been with us for a while, but man. Well, yeah, you've made a lot of great stuff for us out on the blog. So definitely, those of you watching today, if you want additional PowerShell, Power CLI, and automation tutorials, Luke writes a lot of great articles for us out on the Altera blogs. Again, I'll put those URLs back up a little bit later in the session today. So, all right, thank you, sir. And then a little quick word about the sponsor of today's webinar. Again, the company I work for, Altera Software. So we're a fast-growing developer of pretty fantastic, awesome backup software designed for managed service providers and IT resellers and IT departments. That virtual backup solution is trusted by 40,000 plus customers, 9,000 plus partners, and it's actually 1,200 plus MSPs worldwide now. So that flagship product is Altera VM Backup. If you want a little bit more information on that, you can go to altera.com/VM-backup. And if you're an MSP, you want a little bit more information on the MSP program, go to altera.com/MSP for more information. So with that, let's actually get to what you came to hear about today. So first off, we're just going to start with some very, simple Power CLI basics in case you don't know exactly what Power CLI is, or if you are aware of it and you need a couple of gap fillers. Hopefully, we'll get everybody on kind of the same page as far as Power CLI goes here. Now, the thing about Power CLI is, a lot of people think it's its own thing, but really it's just a PowerShell module. It's just a PowerShell module that gets pushed down on top of PowerShell, and you have all of the Power CLI and VMware related commandlets at your disposal at that point. So the nice thing about it is, as it runs on PowerShell, it follows all of, PowerShell's main rules and expectations, and it really runs in a uniform way to basically every other PowerShell module that's out there. It utilizes PowerShell's help function to make it simple and uniform to get the help information just like you would for any other commandlets, and it works pretty well. So as far as installation goes, you used to have to download an executable and run the setup file, but that's not the way it's done anymore. You can actually just use the install module commandlet inside of PowerShell. You fire up PowerShell in an administrator mode, do install module -name vmware.powercli, and it takes care of the installation for you. So really, really simple, really easy to get installed. We actually have a blog that I link to a little bit later in the slide deck here that gives you all the nitty-gritty details on how to get it installed via that option and a little bit more. It also includes a video as well. So again, I'll have that in a slide a little bit later in the deck if you're interested. The other nice thing about Power CLI is it can be used to interact directly with ESXi and vCenter, and it can be used to interact directly with VMs and the operating system within those VMs, which is really cool. And I'm going to show you an example of that here shortly. So, with that introduction out of the way, I kind of wanted to share some of what I find to be the most useful, the most powerful commandlets that I tend to use in basically all of my Power CLI scripts. Without a doubt, and this surprises some people, without a doubt, get help is my absolute most favorite commandlet because just ask my wife, my memory is the absolute worst. So it's 8 o'clock in the morning here on the Eastern United States, and I don't remember what I had for breakfast this morning. So get help is an absolute godsend for me because if I need to remember how a commandlet works, I just issue get help and I get all of the help information I need. So an example of the help information is in that image there on the right hand side of the slide. If I need to update help, grab the latest help information, you can do that with the update help command. If I need to find a command that I'm looking for or a command, I can't quite remember what the command's called, Git command is a great tool for that. And now we get into more of the the Power CLI specific commands here. So connect VI server. I'm going to show you how that works here in a second. So basically, when you fire up Power CLI, you have to connect to an endpoint. You have to connect to an ESXi host. You have to connect to a vCenter server. You have to connect to something to execute all of those commands to, right? And that's what that commandlet takes care of for you. Set Power CLI configuration. That commandlet basically controls how Power CLI functions. And I'm going to show you a little bit more information about that as well. Start, stop VM, they do exactly what they sound like they do. Wait tools is another one of my favorites. So think about the way a VMware VM functions, right? So the operating system inside of that virtual machine boots up, and then you have VMware tools inside of that virtual machine. That service starts after the OS is running, and then it starts reporting into the hypervisor to share various bits and pieces of information, right? Well, what the wait tools command does is it waits for tools to become responsive in the target virtual machine before continuing on for the script. So what's really nice about that commandlet is if I want to conduct some sort of scripted action against a virtual machine that requires a reboot, that actually gives me a mechanism to wait until the reboot of the virtual machine is complete before continuing, which is really helpful. And I've got a great scripted example that I'll show you here a little bit later with a URL to the script as well, where that commandlet just shines. The next one that's also really powerful is invoke VM script. So kind of a rhetorical question here, but how many of you have needed to remotely execute a script against a machine, but there was no network connectivity? Maybe you're in a secured environment. Maybe it's a new machine that you're still deploying. Now, obviously this is a virtual webinar, so I'm imagining a number of you are raising your hands out there, but I still run into that quite frequently. And the beauty of invoke VM script allows me to execute code against a virtual machine without needing a network connection. Basically what it does is it utilizes VMware tools to send the script and the output back and forth between Power CLI and the virtual machine and the guest inside of the virtual machine. I'm going to show you how that works here in just a second. Two other ones that I feel are worth mentioning. Get VI event. If I want to take a look at the event log for either the ESXi host or the vCenter instance, that's a fantastic commandlet to have. And it's got a lot of great filtering capabilities as well. And then finally, one thing I always like to point out is just the way that variables are defined inside of PowerShell. This is less of a Power CLI thing and more of a PowerShell thing. But if I want to capture a variable, it's just, the $ variable name equals something. Now, something could be a string of text. It could be, running a commandlet. And you'll see a couple of examples of that here in just a second. So with that, let's cut over to a demo. I'm just going to kind of show you some of this stuff in action. And let me fire this up. And we've got, I'm doing this in PowerShell ISE just because the visibility is a little bit better. At least I hope so. Luke, can you confirm that the text is fairly good sized?
Yep, looks good. Perfect.
All right, good deal. So let's kind of step through some of these commands that I mentioned earlier. So the first I want to start with is kind of how I start working on script. Hey, I've got a particular task in mind, and I want to find a commandlet that kind of helps me with that task, right? So in this particular instance, let's say I'm looking for a particular process. So I don't know what the exact name is, so I'm going to use the get commandlet and basically search for anything with the word process in it. So if I execute this, that gives me a full list of all the commandlets in PowerShell that have the word process in the list. So I can see, oh, hey, start process, oh, get process. That sounds like it works well. How does that commandlet work? Well, that's where the get help commandlet comes into play. So you can run get help name and the name of the commandlet, and that will give you the help information for that commandlet. Now, if this is a new machine, it may prompt you and say, hey, the help information is not current. Would you like to run update help? that's where update help comes in. And that will actually download the latest help information. That way you can get this fantastic help information on your machine. Now, the other thing I always like to point out with get help is the way that I learn is less from a textbook type of situation, but more from, I want my hands on whatever I'm working with, and I actually want to see concrete examples. And that's where this examples parameter comes into play here. So basically I'm running the same command, but I'm appending dash examples at the end of it. So here I can actually get a number of different examples of the commandlet in action here. So I see example 1. If I just want to get a list of running processes on the machine, I just run the commandlet by itself, right? But maybe that's not what I want to do exactly. Maybe I don't want a list of all the processes running on the machine. Maybe I just want a specific subset of them. So this particular example running on my machine here, I know my machine has an NVIDIA GPU in it. And I've got the NVIDIA driver suite installed and all that. So I know that there are some NVIDIA processes running on this machine. And let's say I want to just get all the processes that are kind of related to NVIDIA. So here what I'm doing is I'm using get process dash name, and I'm searching for anything with the word NVIDIA in the process name. And then what I'm doing from there is I'm piping that to select object. So basically, instead of just getting the process name, I want to see all of the relevant details associated with that process, and that's what the select object star does. So if I run this piece of code here, I get basically all of the processes that are running that have NVIDIA in the name. So there's one, this NVIDIA web helper, and I can see all the different bits and pieces of information about this process. Very, very helpful, very handy. Now, you didn't come to see about just, regular PowerShell stuff, right? Let's actually get into PowerCLI now. So let's say I want to use get command to figure out, what are all the PowerCLI related commandlets that are available to me. I can use the get command again, but this time we're going to use this module parameter and actually specify any module, any PowerShell module that has the string VMware in it. And essentially what this does is it gives me a full list of all the PowerCLI and the VMware related commandlets. As you can see, there are quite a few of them, quite a lot. So if I keep scrolling through the list here, I see, oh, get VM. That seems, that seems simple enough, right? What if I just try running get VM? Does it work? No, it doesn't. And why is that? That's because, like I said earlier, you have to actually connect to something before we can execute any of these commandlets. So what we use here to do that is the connect VI server commandlet. But in order to use that commandlet, we need a couple of pieces of information. So I mentioned variables in one of the slides, and how you can define variables and do it a couple of different ways. This first way, I'm basically just capturing the IP address of this ESXi host I'm gonna connect to. So basically what this commandlet here is doing is it's capturing this IP address inside of this ESXi host variable. So if I execute that, the variable's captured. Now I can actually use a commandlet to create a variable as well. So what I'm doing here with this ESXi creds variable is I'm using the get credential PowerShell commandlet to capture a set of credentials. So if I run this, it will actually prompt me for credentials to the ESXi host, which I will capture now. Hopefully I didn't fat finger that. And now what we're going to do is it allows us to run this connect VI server commandlets, with a lot less hassle, because we can just pass through these variables to the various parameters and not have to do what I just did inside of this single one-line command. So if I run this command, assuming I typed the credentials incorrectly, now we're connected. We're connected to this ESXi host. Now, one thing I always like to point out is if this is the first time you're connecting to a new ESXi host, if you don't have any certificates installed, any security certificate installed on a ESXi host, it'll actually fail. By default, PowerCLI will not connect to any ESXi host that doesn't have a security certificate associated with it. So what you have to do is you have to actually configure your PowerCLI configuration to either ignore that or prompt you if you want to, or just give you a warning. I mean, best practices is to have a security certificate, right? But for for lab situations, maybe you're not as worried about that, right? And that's where this the set power CLI configuration commandlet comes in. And these are all the various ways that you can run it. I'm not going to do that now because I've already got it set up the way I want. But one thing I do want to mention is, what if you want to find out how you currently have it configured? You could run this get power CLI configuration commandlet, and we use a couple of filtering techniques here to get the information that we're really looking for. So here I'm selecting the objects, from the output of this commandlet that give me the scope of the setting and what the invalid certificate action is. So if I actually run that, I can see that, for the various scopes, basically I have everything set to prompt me. So if I connect to another new ESXi host and there's no certificate installed, it's going to say, hey, dude, this has no certificate. Do you still want to connect? Yes or no? And that's the way that I currently have mine set up. So anyway, let's get back to actually doing stuff with Power CLI, and that is, let's start with get VM. So I can get VM, and I can see a list of VMs on the machine. So here in my case, I only have a single ESXi host, or sorry, a single virtual machine running on this ESXi host, and it's currently powered on. I can see it's got 2 CPUs and about 2 gigs of memory associated with it. What if I want to get a little bit more information about that VM? I can do the same thing. I can specify the VM I'm looking at, and again, I'm going to do the select object star command. I'm going to pipe it here to get even more information out of it. So you can see I got a lot more information out of this. I can see, memory megabytes, memory gigs. I can see, what host it's on, what folder it's in. If you had vCenter installed, you get a lot more information than this. This is just a standalone ESXi host, but it kind of gives you an idea of the amount of information that you can get. We do the same thing for data stores. So I can see here that I've got a single data store here. If I had several data stores and I wanted to see what the free space situation looks like on all of them, I can run this command here. And it will give me kind of more of a vertically sorted list with name at the top and capacity and free space at the bottom. Kind of a useful little thing to run there. And then just to make sure that Luke has enough time to run through his stuff, I'm going to move on to the get VI event section here. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, that you can use Power CLI to actually look for events inside of the event log in ESXi or vCenter host. This is particularly useful in situations where you want to have a script wait until a specific event is seen in the event log. But in this particular situation, as an example, what I'm doing here is I'm just saying, hey, I want to see all of the events that are associated with the entity win server, which is just the name of the VM, which I just messed up my script. Let me fix that really quick. There we go. And if I run that, it gives me all of the event logs that are associated with that particular virtual machine, which could be useful for troubleshooting. The other nice thing about this is PowerShell has the ability to export things to like an HTML format if you want. And I think, Luke, you have a couple of blog posts out there that explain how to do things like that, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
So then finally, I just want to leave you with one really, really cool thing. At least I think it's really cool, and that's the usage of invoke VM script. Now, invoke VM script, like I said, is the mechanism that Power CLI has that allows me to basically send PowerShell code back and forth between the operating system inside of a VMware VM. Again, it does this using VMware tools. In order to do this, I have to set up a few things first. So the first 2 things I'm doing here is I'm defining a couple of variables. I'm saying this is my target VM, which is Win server. I'm capturing a new set of credentials because I'm already authenticated to the host, but I still need to authenticate to the virtual machine, or to the operating system inside of that virtual machine, right? And that's what I'm doing here. I'm capturing the credentials for that Windows operating system. So let me do this really quick. It's just in a work group, so it's just a local administrator account. Again, hoping I didn't fat finger those. And then what I'm doing here is I'm actually capturing the block of code that I want to execute inside of a variable. So basically what we're going to do is we're just going to look and see if the file server role is installed inside of that Windows virtual machine. So I'm going to capture those variables, and then let's actually take a look here. So you can see I'm using invoke VM script. I have to tell it which VM to target. I have to tell it which credentials to use. So what are the credentials for the guest operating system? And then what is the script text that we're running? So here I'm just running the script text that's contained inside of this get fs role variable. So if I execute that, it's going to use VMware tools to send this Power CLI code into the guest operating system of the virtual machine, and it actually returns back the information I was looking for. So again, I was looking to see, hey, is the fs-file server role installed? And it's currently not. And if I wanted to, I could run this next line here to install that file server role if I wanted to, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to do that at this point. So this kind of gives you an idea of the flexibility and the power of Power CLI, and really gives you a number of different ways to basically get things done inside of your organization, right? So with that, let's go ahead and pick up the slide deck again, and we'll keep moving. So I'm just going to take a quick conversation here on taking this a step further. But before we do that, I want to talk about this idea of imperative scripting versus declarative scripting. These are kind of two different methodologies for scripting and programming out there in the industry. And really it breaks down to this. An imperative scripting model really focuses on the how. How does the script, get to its goal? Maybe it does X and then it does Y and then it does Z. It really focuses on that process, whereas the declarative model focuses more on the desired result. Maybe you're not so concerned with the how, but you just want a couple of virtual machines and you want these roles configured when everything is said and done. Now, everything that I've showed you so far kind of falls more into the imperative model. And that's really how kind of scripting has evolved over the last 15, 20 years, as we've been more in the imperative world. And then we've kind of, in the age of the cloud, we've started getting more towards the declarative side. Now, one thing I wanted to leave you with before we switch over to Luke is kind of an example of an imperative model. Kind of a script that's kind of takes that imperative model to the nth degree. So this is an example of a script I wrote a year or two back. And the URL is there at the top of the screen. Basically what the script does is it does something similar to what I just showed you, in that it uses a combination of VM deployment commandlets and invoke VM script to deploy a number of virtual machines inside of a vCenter instance, and then using invoke VM script to actually reach inside of those virtual machines and do things like spin up a new domain and create a new domain user and create a new file server and add it to the new domain. I mean, basically it takes the data center deployment concept and really puts it on steroids with Power CLI. You can check the script out in your own time if you want. It's heavily commented. Again, it's at that URL at the top, but this is a great example of an imperative model. Now, the problem with the imperative model is that, again, in the age of the cloud, you're more concerned with, the results rather than the how. And that's, really the stuff that Luke's going to be taking you through here in just a second really kind of falls into that space. So Luke, I think you're up to take us into the declarative type of world here.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, like Andy was saying, declarative is more of the here's what I want, make it so. So that's the whole idea behind configuration management. And go ahead and go on to the next slide, Andy.
Sure.
So what is DSC? DSC is Microsoft's solution that falls into the configuration management space. When it first emerged, many people tried to compare it to Chef, Puppet, Ansible, but it was originally developed as just a framework that those types of products would use to leverage. Their goal was to develop this framework first, and then eventually down the road make management tools for DSC. Many in Microsoft would say they've waited too long. They're currently focusing on creating some management tools for DSC. It's mostly going into Azure. So Azure DSC is going to be where you'll be managing your desired state configuration. Also, it is, the great thing about DSC is that if you can do it in PowerShell, you can create a DSC resource for it. So if you have a script that deploys a web server, configures some in-house developed application, you can create a DSC resource for it and take advantage of that configuration management. So it's really cool, very powerful. The only thing is there isn't that many tools yet to management compared to the Chef, Puppet, and Ansible products. VMware has released their own vSphere DSC resources for managing vSphere. It's on GitHub. It's actively being worked on today. It's kind of hokey. If you look at this chart here, it requires a Windows server that basically controls your VMware environment. So you have to have a Windows server that access the local configuration management proxy. It needs to have PowerShell 5.1, has to have PowerCLI installed, and basically it reaches out to a DSC pull server for its configuration, takes that configuration and applies those changes with PowerCLI into your VMware environment. So it's very niche, and it will only really fit into certain scenarios, but it's free. So that's one tool that you can keep in your back pocket. So go ahead and go on to the next slide here. So cloud integrations in Terraform. This is kind of a quick chart on the evolution of managing infrastructure. In the beginning, we kind of went from manual deployments and changes. You click next, next, next to install your application. I remember the days of loading up a CD into a server in order to install Windows, logging into each server to make a change, make sure its registry key is there. We've moved on from that. Now we're using scripted deployments like Andy showed. Scripting out mass automated changes, running our VB and PowerShell scripts to deploy infrastructure and make changes. Typically, we're saving our scripts to a file share for team use. And the trend is shifting slowly towards infrastructure as code, where we're taking on more of the developer mindset. So infrastructure is defined and managed by code with a developer mindset. Configurations are documented and stored in version control. And then teams collaborate on infrastructure code and make approved changes to the code itself instead of modifying the infrastructure directly. So that means if you got a VM out there and you need to bump up the CPU, you don't go up to the vSphere and do it that way. You edit the code itself and then execute the code, just like a developer would do with their applications. So go ahead and next slide. So what are the advantages of infrastructure as code? Auditing and version tracking. So you can easily track who did what and when for any changes to the infrastructure. Also in the case of an audit, or if you're trying to be in compliance for a certain certification like ISO certified, your documentation is already there. You're living and working in your code, which is your documentation. So all you have to do is hand it off to the auditor and get on with your day. There's no quickly making Word documents, video documents to hand over to the auditor. So it's a nice little advantage there. Consistency amongst infrastructure. Terraform is a lot more robust than just running a script to install an application. It has checks that are already built into it. So in my experience, I've had a few deployment scripts where it installs an agent on a server and that gets missed either due to a timing issue or some sort of bug, and that server ends up getting deployed without the agent. Well, Terraform's a little different. It'll tell you. So another benefit is you now have one tool to deploy and configure other tools. So the process is going to be the same for creating and configuring all the tools that Terraform is designed to work with, whether it's Hyper-V, VMware, Azure, AWS. So there's no having to remember where to click in the GUI for each product. It's all done through the code, which is awesome. Last but not least, it's free. So the open source version of Terraform, you can just download it and get started today if you want. So just wait till the webinar is done. And that leaves us with the demo.
All right, let me go ahead and make you presenter, Luke.
Yeah.
Okay, you should have the presentation roller. There you go. Yep, I can see your screen.
Okay, cool. So here I have a simple Terraform configuration. It's a .tf, that's what they're called. The .tf vars file is a variables file. That's where I have all my passwords in clear text. I don't want to show you my configuration with the passwords in them. So basically my configuration is just looking automatically at this tf-vars file for the different variables. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to deploy a few VMs here with Terraform, and I'm going to go ahead and show you what it looks like. We're going to deploy this one real quick just to get it running. It takes about 3-4 minutes to run. So basically what we'll do is we browse out to this directory, open up a PowerShell console, and just type in the Terraform command. It will look in this directory for the TF file, and it will start the process of applying that configuration. Oops, hold on, I missed one step. Terraform init. So that basically downloads the provider plugin for vSphere. So that basically allows Terraform to interact with the APIs with our vSphere environment. So you see here, it downloaded the folder, has all the contents it needs to interact with our vSphere environment. So Terraform apply. Now, if you're familiar with Git, let me resize this. It kind of looks like this for change tracking. Since we don't have the resource VM1 available, it is going to add it, and it gives it a green plus sign. So we go ahead and type in yes, and then we'll let that run, and that will start deploying our VM. So while that's running, I'm gonna go ahead and open up the configuration, and I'll explain a little bit high level on what each object is in here. So at the beginning, we have our variables. This is what's defined in my tf-vars file. So typically, you wouldn't have your tf-vars file locally. There's other solutions for storing your passwords. You can store it in Azure's Key Vault. AWS has a solution, and Terraform has their own product called Vault. So those are, in a production environment, you'd want to have something like that set up. But for the sake of the demo, we're just doing clear text password in a tf-vars file. The provider, like I explained earlier, is the way that Terraform communicates over the APIs with vCenter. Data sources is the data that you're fetching from that provider, and we'll use that data in our resource to create our resource. And then that leads us to resource, which is the object that you're creating. So in our case, it's a VM. If you notice here, the $ with the brackets, it's called interpolation. That is referencing data or objects elsewhere in the configuration. So that's kind of how the configuration is built up. You have your data sources, and then you're referencing back to it with interpolation. And it can get really complex. You can do all kinds of fancy stuff with this. This is pretty simple. I wanted to keep it simple for you guys, but that's basically how a configuration is set up. So what happens if we want to decommission a VM? Well, let's go ahead and decommission this one here. Let me go ahead and show you my VMware environment real quick. So my VM1 VM that we're deploying right now is still building. It's probably got about 2 minutes left. Let's go ahead and decommission VM2. So we'll open up a administrative PowerShell prompt. We'll go to that directory, VM2, and all you gotta do is type in terraform destroy, and it will give us an action plan with the red minus sign, meaning VM2 will be destroyed. So gotta be careful when you use this one, but we'll type in yes, and there we go. You can see in the background, It's shutting down the OS, and then it will delete it. There it goes, done.
And again, this kind of follows that declarative model, right, Luke? I mean, you're basically saying this is what I want things to be like, and it's just doing it for you.
Yep, all through code. So, yep, just like I said, that developer mindset of your code does all your work for you. So what if we have to modify the CPU on a VM? Let's go ahead and do that real quick here. I'm opening up the configuration file for VM3. We'll just bump up the CPU here to 4 and save it. And then we'll go ahead and browse out to that directory. Reapply the config with Terraform apply. And this time it gives us a little squiggly line showing that there's going to be a change to that resource. And then it will actually point out the change that's going to be made. So CPU will change from 2 to 4. So go ahead and click yes. And we'll go ahead and that quickly, done. CPU is at 4. So pretty powerful stuff here. Let's see, this will be done really soon here. One thing I want to point out is we now have a TF state file. So what this file does is it keeps track of the state of whatever object you're building with Terraform. So if I make a change to the configuration and reapply it, it will change the state. One of the biggest setbacks for the state file is, let me open this up here. Always takes a second. If you drill into this, you can see the entire configuration of this VM. But if I scroll down here, I can see my passwords in clear text. It's best practice to have your state file off-site somewhere that's either on-prem encrypted with a password protection or in the cloud. Terraform has a free service called Terraform Enterprise. There's a free cloud tier that provides you the ability to do this. It's called Remote State. And I'll go ahead and show you how I have that set up here. Right now we're going to go ahead and go into a Git repo. So I have an Azure repo set up. I pulled down my configurations. I have 2 VMs, Web 1, Web 2. Web 2 is already deployed. We'll go ahead and deploy Web 1 here. And then I'll explain how this is set up using a source control and remote state with Terraform Enterprise Cloud. Let's go ahead and navigate over here. And then we do the same, Terraform apply. Gives me the pluses. My plan is to add the resource. Yes. There we go. We'll let that bake while we're talking here. So there's 2 extra components that I've added to my configuration here. Let me scroll up to the top. Oh, sorry, my mouse is a little funny. There we go. Okay, so I have this section here called Terraform Backend. This basically tells the configuration to store the state file offsite onto Terraform's Enterprise Cloud. My Terraform CLI is configured with a token, and it allows my client on my workstation to securely store that file onto Terraform's cloud. And then if we scroll down to the bottom here, oh, sorry, there you go. So I have this extra section in here, provisioner. So provisioners are your configuration management. A lot of people make the mistake of comparing Terraform with a configuration management tool. It's not, it's an orchestration tool. So you would use Terraform in combination with your configuration managers. So you would use Terraform to deploy the high-level infrastructure, create those components, and then you would use your configuration management to configure the underlying OS and applications. So in this case, I have a provisioner set to run a PowerShell script that basically, once my VM is done building, it will assign it up into Azure as a DSC node. It'll apply a configuration. I have a web configuration set, so it will install the IIS role, and then it will basically use the same command that Andy showed, invoke VM script, to tell the server to report back to the pull server instantly and grab its config. So then we get an instant configuration of IIS. So I'm going to go ahead and show you while this is still building. Yeah, we got 2 minutes in. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and show you our Azure repo here. I have my 2 configurations that I pulled down from here. One thing to note, Terraform.tfrs, you would never put this into source code. This is a no-no. I did this just for the sake of the demo so I can pull everything down. But if you have it in source code, all your passwords are in clear text, so not a good idea. Typically, what you'd want to do is, if you're familiar with Git, you can add files and folders into your git ignore file so that when you save stuff up into your repo, then it will not include those files and folders. So I have my .terraform folder excluded, so I don't have the plugin provider upload into source control every time. But I wanted to show you real quick here. If I click on my config, go into history, I get the auditing log of every different change that I've made to my config. So if I click on here, adjust memory, I can see that I modified the memory of this VM at some point in time. So this is really powerful stuff. You get all the auditing and tracking that you never knew you wanted. So this is one of the huge benefits of infrastructure as code, because your entire infrastructure is tracked in source code. So really powerful stuff. Let's take a look here. Okay, still building. We'll go ahead and take a look at Terraform Enterprise. So this is where our remote state file is being saved into. Yeah, this is free to use. You can set up as many workspaces as you want. Workspaces are generally used. I have it set up for each VM. This works fine in a demo environment or in a small environment, but it's typically recommended to have a workspace for each system. So Citrix, all your Citrix servers, all your configurations would be saved under there. And Exchange, that way you can basically assign permissions to those teams and have them look at the state of each of their systems, and they can see all the change in tracking. So if I drill down into this, I can see all the changes that were made, and I can see what change was made. So I destroyed and built this VM quite a few times for the demo, so I can see that was taking place right there. So really powerful stuff.
And Luke, really quick, that'll actually track the user that made the change as well, all right?
Yep. Oh yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. Right here, I can see who made that change. All right. So.
If you mess up my infrastructure, I know who to blame then, right?
Yeah. And that brings up a good case too. So let's say you make a change, the Exchange team's troubleshooting an issue. They don't know what change has been made to their systems. They can go into here and take a look and see without having to bother, wait for somebody to get done with the meeting, schedule a meeting, the next day with somebody because they're too busy. So they can instantly get access into what was going on with their stuff. So super powerful. Yeah, built around team collaboration. So our script is almost done. Let me go ahead and go into Azure DSC. This is what Azure DSC looks like currently. It's a Azure Automation account, and this is the state configuration DSC section. I currently have 2 nodes in here, Web 2 that's already been deployed. This vSphere DSC is my vSphere DSC node that I was talking about in that architectural chart earlier. So this is basically a node on my infrastructure that is enforcing desired state configuration on my ESX host. It's got assigned a DNS node configuration. So let me drill down into this real quick and show you, just so you can see. So this is what a typical DSC configuration looks like. One thing I want to point out that's a real benefit with Azure Automation is that you can store your credentials securely, and then you can call them through your code. So right here, I'm using get automation PS credential, and I have an ESXi password credential saved, and I just call it, run it through my code, and I don't have to mess around with any sort of password security features here.
Really quick question, Luke. Does that password live in Azure Automation, or does that live in Key Vault?
Yep, it is right here under credentials, ESXi password. So you can put tons of credentials in there and call them in your runbooks and your DSC configs. So they're making great strides to improve upon the hybrid cloud automation that you can do with Azure Automation. So it's definitely changing really fast. So our VM has been completed, just under 6 minutes. We have a VM with IIS installed. If I look here, Web 1, it's there. It's got the web server config applied to it. And if I go out to the IP address, just to show you, IIS. So there you go. Really powerful stuff, very fast. So and that's it for the demo, really.
Awesome. That was a great demo. We got a lot of great questions that came in while you were doing the demo, so definitely we'll want to address those here in just a second. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and steal the presenter view back. We got just a couple of other slides to go through here as part of our wrap up and Q&A. If you have questions, make sure to get them into the questions form, because we're going to be addressing those in just a second. While you do that, I want to share just a couple of additional resources with you. We will be sharing the slide deck as well, so you'll get a link to all of these, but these are just some of the, just a small taste of the various Power CLI and automation related articles that we have out there. The vast majority of these are written by Luke himself, so definitely be sure to check these out. The second from the bottom, so use case examples of Power CLI in action, that will link you basically to a list of all the various Power CLI articles out on our VMware blog. So be sure to check that out if you want a more comprehensive list. From there, I know that many of you are likely Windows administrators as well as vSphere and automation administrators. We do have a more recent ebook that's available out there on the new Windows Admin Center, written by another one of our bloggers, Eric Siron. Fantastic ebook, really covers the whole tool in great detail. So if you're interested in getting a little bit more information on that, you can check that out on our website. I actually meant to update the slide to include the URL, but yeah, we'll definitely get the URL out there and send to you. So with that, I want to do a quick mention of Altera VM Backup while you have a few more minutes to get your last questions in. So again, Altera VM Backup is kind of our core backup product. Really, we focus on a number of key things here at Altera. One, we want to make sure that the backup setup is easy to use and efficient. But with that, we also want to make sure that you have full control of your backups using all of the powerful features that you need inside your environments while having access to praise-winning support when you need it. That support is available 24/7. And then we just have a list there of some of our more recent developments, Windows Server 2019 support, grandfather, father, son archiving, when optimized replication in DR, et cetera, et cetera. If you want a little bit more information on that, you can go to altera.com/vm-backup for more information. And again, if you are an MSP, you want a little bit more information on our MSP model, go to altera.com/MSP for more information. And then one other thing I wanted to share here as well is we do have an Altera Office 365 backup application now. So if you're running Office 365, we have the ability to back up Office 365 hosted mailboxes. That's mailboxes, contacts, and calendars. We do that on a simple annual billing model if you are an end user. If you're an MSP, we offer that as a mailbox per month model. And it's really simple to use. Basically, you just authenticate to your Office 365 organization, and we start doing backups for you. So it's basically it's really easy to set up. I mean, a couple of clicks and you're doing backups of your mailboxes. If you might want more information on that, the top link there at the bottom takes you to the Office 365 backup page for end users and IT departments, and the bottom one is more geared towards MSPs. Now, Q&A. I wanted to make sure we have a couple of minutes for Q&A here. We've got 5-6 minutes. I don't want to keep you too much over, but we had a lot of great questions come in during your demo, especially Luke. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at any of the questions. I don't know if you want to address any of them specifically, or if you want me to just go through the list.
Yeah, I see one. Can Terraform work in Azure? Actually, funny thing, if you've ever messed around with Cloud Shell in Azure, Terraform's actually built into it. It comes natively in Cloud Shell. So yeah, Terraform is perfect for Azure. It's actually the most used management tool for Azure, other than PowerShell, but like compared to like the Chefs and Puppets and Ansibles, Terraform's on top right now. So
nice. Any others that you want to address?
Looking through the list here. Did you see any?
So there were a couple that stood out to me. One of them was basically just a question. Do you have to have deep scripting knowledge to use Terraform? I thought that was a good question that we should probably address.
That is a good question. No, actually, it's I find it's easier to get started with than PowerShell. Terraform, the company that makes it's called HashiCorp. They do a really good job of different lessons on Terraform. You can get started within the day using it. It's designed to be human readable language, and if you can fill out a form, you can write in a Terraform config. It's really simple. So
nice. Another one we have here is, can you use Terraform to deploy templates from content libraries? We had Paul ask that and said he's struggling to get that working.
Content libraries in GitHub, or
it didn't really specify. I'm not sure.
Context.
We'll see if he's still in the webinar. Maybe he can give us a little bit more context as what he means by content libraries. Let's see. For Power CLI, Luke, maybe you have the answer to this. Is there a way to detect user sessions? I'm guessing, to detect whether, there are other people using Power CLI. Could be they're talking about Horizon too, maybe.
In Horizon, I believe there's some commandlets for that, but for just user sessions into vSphere, I don't know of any way of doing that. I don't know if it's capable of that.
Okay. There was another one that I wanted to cover here. Oh, right here. So what's the difference between vRealize Automation and Terraform?
The big thing about that is vRealize Automation is going to work with just VMware products. Terraform is going to work with many different products. There's a huge list of providers out there that you can use Terraform with. So let's say you have a hybrid cloud scenario. Everyone's doing hybrid cloud this year. If you want to set up Terraform for your on-prem, you can, and it will be the same process for Azure, AWS, Google Cloud. So that's the real benefit you get when using Terraform.
That actually is a nice segue into this next question. Does Power CLI work with AWS? And that I would see it working with vSphere on AWS. I'm not an AWS guy myself, but I would suspect that they have their own Cloud Shell type of.
They have their own commandlets that you would use in place of that. So.
Gotcha. Figured as much. Like I said, I'm not an AWS guy, but it would have surprised me if they didn't. So
yeah, you could use it in the same script too. You just have to have the modules loaded. You can manage both with the same script. Yeah.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. I mean, you can actually load modules mid-script too if you need to, correct?
Yep.
So best practice would probably state to load all the modules at the beginning of the script. just to make sure that they're there, but I mean, you could if you needed to.
Yep.
Let's see. Keep the questions coming, everyone. If we don't answer all the questions today, we'll be sure to get you an answer in like a follow-up blog post. Let's see. I think we have a couple of polls too that we want to put up really quick while I'm thinking of it. If we go ahead and put up the first poll. There we go. Kind of want to gauge your reaction to this, everyone. If you can go ahead and take a look at the polls. So basically the question is, what's your favorite tool for managing vSphere? And I'm kind of interested to see here. We have 3 options there: Power CLI, the vSphere console, or some other tool. We'll give that a second to run here while we answer another question. So let's see. Terraform could help in deploying VMs in vRealize automation infrastructure.
Yeah, I believe there's a provider for that. There's one for NSX as well.
All right. Let's see. A lot of great comments and questions here. So real quick, we're sharing the poll results, and yeah, this is pretty much what I expected here. So we have 36% said Power CLI was their preferred tool, 62% the vSphere console, and 2% said another tool. So I'd be interested in what that other tool is. If anybody can share that in the, you can just use the questions form for that. Just out of curiosity myself. What was that, Luke?
So I said probably Nutanix.
Yeah, possibly. I could see that being part of it. Yeah. Let's see. What's the difference between Power CLI, DSC, and Terraform?
I kind of went over that a little bit. So Terraform is the orchestration tool that you would use to build your like your shell VMs. You would use DSC more to configure the OS and the applications inside and enforce that configuration repeatedly. Terraform's more of an orchestration tool, basically.
All right, good deal. We've got one more poll to put up here really quick. Just out of curiosity, I always like to get the audience's reaction on various things, and I don't know, me personally, I find it helpful to know what others are doing. So this one is, do you plan on using vSphere in a hybrid scenario? So this would be like you've got vSphere on premises, but then maybe you're going to use vSphere in AWS or something along those lines. So go ahead and let us know what your response is there, just out of curiosity. And the other thing that this does is it helps us, determine what type of topics that you all want to hear about. So maybe, if we have a particularly strong response one way or the other, we might, come at you with another webinar later on around that particular topic. So your participation is greatly appreciated. So I think, Luke, what we'll do is we'll cover one more question here. We'll go to the poll results, and then we'll let everyone go for the day. So any other questions that you wanted to address that you saw, or you just want me to pick one?
Go ahead and pick one.
All right, let's see here. This is a good one here. This actually builds on Paul's comment. Content libraries in VMware. So basically using Terraform to deploy templates from a content library in VMware.
I'm not sure about that one. I'll have to look that one up and let you guys know.
Okay. Yeah, well, Paul, we'll definitely be sure to address that in the follow-up blog post to make sure we get you the answer there. Let's see. I think that covers a lot of the good ones here. And again, let's share those poll results. And again, if we didn't get your question answered, we'll be sure to do it in the follow-up blog post. So be on the lookout for that. And as far as the poll results go, 24% said no hybrid cloud at all. 60% plan to test it out. With 11% will be using it. 4% plan to use it for everything. So
that's surprising. 60%.
I know. Yeah, definitely. I was expecting maybe 1-2% on that one, but 4% is a little bit more than I suspected.
given how expensive it is, and I believe you have to pay for 3 nodes right off the bat because it
I
runs
think so, yeah. Yep. All right. Well, with that, I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. So I think with that, we're going to go ahead and let everybody go. So first off, Luke, I want to say thanks for taking the time to come out and talk to us today. You're always a wealth of information. So your time is much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. And then everyone, thanks for attending. We really appreciate coming out, and we hope that you'll join us for a future Altero sponsored webinar. And have a great day.